It's called COGAT. They have their registry. Everyone that is born is registered with the Israelis. Everyone that died is registered with the Israelis. They have identification numbers. You can compare those IDs that were published by the Ministry of Health in Gaza to the actual figures. Would the United States do that? To look at it, to substantiate these figures that we hear.
So
I mean, the figures are staggering, 8,400. That's a lot of people.
Let me just say this. We don't have the ability to offer independent assessments of what's happening on the ground in Gaza because we do not have people there to conduct, let me finish, to conduct that type of assessment. But we recognize that thousands of innocent civilians have been killed. That includes a significant number of children. That every one of those losses is a tragedy, whatever the number is. Whether it's the number that has been released from Gaza or whether it's some other number, every one of them is a tragedy. And we mourn the loss of every one of those civilians, which is why we continue to emphasize that Israel must conduct all of its operations consistent with the laws of war, and why, as I said, we're working to deliver this humanitarian assistance into Gaza.
I have a couple more questions before that. I want to ask you about the Red Crescent issued a statement that Israel is warning the Al-Quds hospital and Shifa hospital to evacuate, and they have been bombing around it and so on. Does that raise your concern? Would you tell the Israelis don't bomb hospitals? Because sometimes these patients cannot be moved.
So, as I said a minute ago, we expect Israel to operate consistent with international law, including the need to take feasible precautions to minimize harm to civilians. And of course, hospitals and other sites are protected civilian infrastructure.
And my last question on the West Bank. There's been an uptick in settler violence. They have guns, American guns that have been distributed to them and so on. They forced people out of a couple of villages and so on. I wonder if you're following this on this issue, or everybody just caught in what's happening in Gaza.
We are following it. In fact, you heard the president speak to this publicly last week.
Right. I'm saying in terms of actual steps on the ground.
Let me just say, we consistently and unequivocally condemn all acts of terrorism and violence and the targeting of civilians, including the recent attacks by Israeli extremist settlers in the West Bank. Israel must take measures to protect Palestinians from such attacks and to hold accountable any settlers who carry out attacks, as well as any members of the Israeli Defense Forces who stand by or fail to intervene when these attacks occur. And I will just say that we have made clear privately to the Israeli government and publicly that these attacks are unacceptable, they need to stop, and those responsible need to be held accountable.
I have three questions. First is Save the Children Fund, which is a US funded NGO, said that more children in Gaza were killed than all conflicts combined since 2019, and that's in 3 weeks. So does this number translate to you, as you said, that Israel actually abiding by international law and not targeting civilians?
So I'm going to go back to the thing we have said before, which is the thing that makes this so difficult is that Hamas continues to hide its military infrastructure, its terrorist infrastructure, inside civilian locations. They bury their operations in tunnels under hospitals, under schools. They keep headquarters in residential apartment buildings. But if you listen to what Jake Sullivan, the president's national security advisor, said on television yesterday, while this heightens the burden for Israel, it does not absolve them of the responsibility to act consistent with the laws of war. That is our clear policy. We have made it clear to them privately, and we've made it clear publicly on a number of occasions.
I want to give you just a small analogy before I move to the second, which is very simple. So if you want to shoot a bad guy, and this bad guy went and grabbed 3 kids from the street and put them in front of them, do you shoot the bad guy with the kids?
I'm not going to engage in kind of
okay,
hypotheticals.
Sorry. I have to go to the same question.
Go ahead, Shannon.
On efforts to, assuming the administration still says it's just Hamas holding Americans in Gaza back from leaving, those 500 to 600 estimated there, is the administration doing anything new to either incentivize or pressure Hamas to allow outbound foreign nationals?
So just as I won't discuss the details of our work to secure the release of hostages publicly, I'm not going to discuss our work on that publicly, other than to say it is the subject of ongoing conversations. It was the subject of the Secretary's call with the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister of Qatar earlier today. Hamas is making a number of demands before they'll allow people to leave Gaza. I'm not going to speak to those demands, but it's something we're continuing to try to work through. Just as we believe they ought to release all the hostages they are holding, we believe they ought to release or let let leave all the American citizens and other foreign nationals who are being basically forced to remain in Gaza against their will because Hamas won't uphold its responsibility to operate its side of the Rafah crossing to allow people to move through the crossing into Egypt.
Thank you. And the State Department is also a follow-up, if I can. Israel is the last government-led charter flight is going to leave Israel tomorrow. And now, is this because there's no demand for such charter flights anymore? Is there a different reason? Might more be out of the food?
It is purely a demand issue. We had a charter flight leave yesterday that had 5 people on it. We have consistently seen the demand for our charter flights go down where we had a lot of flights going out with 50% capability. I think the number of seats that we have offered, we've had something like 25% of them actually be filled. So there continue to be ways to leave Israel commercially. We've offered a number of ways over the past few weeks to leave through our charter flights. We have notified everyone that the charter flight tomorrow is the last one that we are currently planning. So if they do want to leave, now's the time to do it. Don't wait for another flight. But we will always conduct assessments in real time about whether there's additional demand, whether circumstances change on the ground, and if we need to make additional arrangements, we of course will be open to doing so.
Sorry, 5 people on the
5 people on the.
How big a plane was it?
I don't know, but it wasn't a small one. It was a regular commercial-sized charter flight that went out 5 people on it. So you can see why we would start to.
It was like a full-size passenger plane with only 5 people. It wasn't like a private jet.
It was a full-size plane. So you could see why we would revisit the circumstances of operating these charter flights.
But so wait, does that mean that? And I'm sorry to get into the weeds here. Did the 5 people get charged the pro rata share of how much that?
I very much doubt that we are charging them the full cost of that. It's the it is the responsibility of the United States government to assist in some of these circumstances. They are charged a fare, but I doubt it is that cost.
Let me just ask you one more thing, because you said that it is the United States of America that has managed to get the amount of aid into Gaza since the beginning of the war. You said about 150 trucks, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Tomorrow, the Secretary and Secretary Austin are going up to the Senate Appropriations Committee to testify about the administration's request for, at least in terms of Israel, I think it's $14.3 billion for Israel.
Correct.
And that's on top of what the U.S. already provides Israel, which is $3.8 roughly billion a year. How much have you pledged to Gaza aid?
So we pledged $100 million already for Gaza aid, but there is a significant amount. I don't have the number at my fingertips. There is a significant amount in that request to Congress that is humanitarian assistance for Gaza. I'm happy to follow up and get the exact number, but there is in that request, it's not just funding for Ukraine or funding for the Israeli military or funding to secure our border. There is also a request for humanitarian assistance.
Is it
Yeah,
it's more than $1 billion?
I don't know, but let me just say I don't want to lose the point. We have
I don't want to lose the point either, but I mean, you're saying that you guys are responsible entirely for getting aid into Gaza, which you admit is not enough.
Let me make
and it's 150 trucks in the last 3 weeks.
Let me make clear.
And you pledged $100 million
let me make
for
clear
it,
what
which is not nothing, but it's not 14.3 billion.
Let me make clear what I meant by those comments. It is not the United States that is providing all of the food, water, medical assistance on those trucks.
You just said that
let
it is the United States of America. You said
let me explain, and I'm explaining to you what I meant. Okay. There is no shortage of countries in the region and international humanitarian networks and organizations who want to provide humanitarian assistance. They have stepped up, and the United States has stepped up as well. They have. But I will say, what the United States was able to do is secure agreement with Israel and the government of Egypt. That has been the breakthrough that we've been able to achieve. It's not really a question, or it's not the only question of the amount of food, the amount of water on those trucks. It's getting agreement and working through the operational questions to get those in there.
Okay,
and that's what the United States has been able to do.
Getting them in there is a priority, but it's also the amount.
I don't have to remind you that
you get 45 trucks in today or yesterday, and you're hoping maybe that another 45 will go in today, but there have only been 150 in the last 3 weeks, and you're giving them $100 million, and yet the Secretary and Secretary Austin are gonna go up and ask for $14.3 billion to go to Israel, you know, this year, on
again,
top of what the U.S. already gives them.
Again, there's humanitarian assistance also included in that package. There are no shortage of other countries who want to provide humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people. But I don't think I have to remind you that before we secured this agreement, there were hundreds of trucks lined up in Egypt outside Rafah that couldn't go in. So it was the leadership of the United States that has gotten that gate open and gotten them in.
I am not trying to say that you guys don't deserve credit for brokering a deal to get it in. I'm just questioning, you know, when you say that, oh, wow, it's the United States of America that's managed to get humanitarian aid in, it's the, after you get the agreement to get it in, it's the amount of aid that's going in, and it is also...
But the barrier to that aid getting in has not been the amount of assistance on the Egyptian side, is getting it inspected and getting it moved through. And that's what we've been able to work on. Saeed, I'm going to come to someone else. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Can you be more specific on the holdup at Rafah? Last week you said that armed militants were blocking the exit of Americans at times, and at other times there was no one there to physically open the gate. As of today, what is Hamas doing to obstruct their exit?
I don't know what they've done on the ground today. We always have, you know, imperfect information that comes to us about what's happening in Gaza, where we don't have anyone operating. But it has been one of those two things that has prevented people from getting out since we started working on this problem. Hamas has made a number of demands, and we're trying to work through the issue.
And just to follow up on that, if Hamas opened the gates today, just to be clear, would Egypt be able and willing to process the Americans?
They are.
Israel?
Go ahead.
Just a follow-up question about this funding request. In the bit where you talk about international assistance or the humanitarian part, it says that some of this humanitarian programming, the crisis could result in displacement across borders and higher regional humanitarian needs, and funding may be used to meet evolving program requirements outside of Gaza, including Israel, West Bank, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. Palestinians point to this particular phrase when they talk about their fears that there's going to be further displacement outside of Gaza. So I'm wondering, when you put this request, were you anticipating that that might happen?
I don't think that we could be any more clear about our position on this question. You saw the president speak to it yesterday, that he opposes the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. You saw the secretary say when he was in the region, when he said that this question is a non-starter. We have had to make clear when you have regional instability like we have here, we have to make reasonable planning expectations for the possibility of refugees. But we have made quite clear that our position is that Palestinians deserve the right to stay on Palestinian land.
Israel?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Alex.
A couple of questions. On Mahachkala, what is the administration's position on what exactly is going on there in Dagestan? And what steps do you expect from Russian government to take to prevent this from happening?
So I would say we condemn the violent anti-Semitic events that have been reported in Russia threatening Israelis and Jews. I saw the video, as I'm sure all you did. It looked like a pogrom to me. We call on Russian authorities to publicly condemn these violent protests, to hold anyone involved accountable, and to ensure the safety of Israelis and Jews in Russia.
Thank you. On Iran as well, based on what you have seen on the ground, do you think the message that you are sending out to Iran is being well received in Iran? And if not, then what happens?
I'm not going to speak to what the Iranians are received. Or what the Iranians have received, or how they have interpreted the messages. I will say that we have been very clear. We have made quite clear that we will defend United States interests and United States personnel in the region. You saw us conduct military operations last week to reinforce that fact. We have made this clear directly to the Iranian government, and we hope that they will choose a path of de-escalation.
And if I may, one more on China, because there have been some multiple meetings between Secretary and his colleague, as well as Special Representative Kim had apparently a conversation with his colleague. Does the Secretary believe that China can be enticed away from supporting Russia in Ukraine? Or in other words, do you guys believe that Beijing's patience towards Putin's, whatever he's doing in Ukraine is not limited?
Again, just as I wouldn't make any assessments about what Iran may or may not do, I'm not going to make any assessments about what China may or may not do. I will speak for the United States and say that in his meetings with Wang Yi on Thursday and Friday, the Secretary did raise the issue of Russia's war against Ukraine and made clear that if China wants to play a productive path forward, we would welcome China doing so. We have said that publicly. Ukraine has said publicly that they would welcome China playing a constructive role. The same thing holds true, by the way, for the Middle East, where one of the things that the Secretary raised in his issue with Wang Yi is the past few weeks after he had an initial phone call with him from Saudi Arabia when we were in the region, the fact that China maintains communications channels with a number of countries in the region, and anything that China can do to lower tensions would be something that would be helpful, and we found it to be a constructive engagement. Yeah.
Could you assess the actions of Moscow, of the Russian government on this? And Russia publicly has blamed outsiders for supposedly fomenting the unrest.
I've seen their comments about blaming Ukraine. That is absurd, obviously. I don't have any assessment to offer. I've seen reports that they may be arresting people. I don't know the full extent of the actions that they will take. I will say that we believe they should hold anyone responsible accountable. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Two questions. The Israeli ambassador to South Korea disclosed evidence that Hamas is using not only Iranian-made weapons, but also North Korean-made weapons. What is the United States' view on this? How do you concern about it?
Well, so Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization, and we oppose anyone providing them with anything they can use to carry out their terrorist activities.
Israel? Okay, thanks, Matt. In light of the October 28 Reuters news report on Turkey's President Erdogan's statement that Israel is an illegal occupier and that Hamas is not a terrorist organization, has President Biden condemned President Erdogan's anti-Semitic comments, which fuel a hatred of Israel, and have a follow-up?
Well, I think we have been pretty clear about our assessment of Hamas. That they are, in fact, a brutal terrorist organization. You saw them carry out a terrorist attack that killed more than 1,400 Israelis, including children and elderly people, on October 7th, including American citizens, and we will continue to be quite clear about that and make our views known to everyone around the world.
The follow-up is, in what ways can President Biden educate the world of Israel's right to all of their ancestral land promised in the Jewish Torah book, Deuteronomy, and help dispel the myth of Israel as the illegal occupier?
So I'm not going to speak to biblical references. I will say that we will continue to make clear we support Israel's right to exist, Israel's right to defend itself, but also that we support a two-state solution as the ultimate resolution to issues between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Go ahead.
Israel?
Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, thank you. All the statements by Mr. Erdogan against Israel and in favor of Hamas, I mean, I have an easy question. Do you like these statements or not? Why you don't say it?
I think I made pretty clear our assessment of Hamas, and it does differ from the one that was offered.
But do you have any problem that your ally Erdogan is saying that Israel is terrorist and not Hamas?
I think our views are pretty well known on this question, that Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization. I don't think anyone is in doubt about what we think about this situation, and we will continue to engage with all of our allies.
And another question, three senators, one second, please.
One more.
Three senators are asking...
People are getting a little rowdy today.
Yes.
What's going on?
Anyway, three senators are asking to expel Turkey from NATO, and I see that Senator Scott says that Hamas murders innocent babies, etc., etc. Erdogan has again shown that his interests don't align with those of the U.S. We need to seriously consider Turkey's membership in NATO if it's willing to side with Iran-backed terrorists. Your comment, please.
So I would say that Turkey, despite our disagreements on this question, has been a valuable NATO ally. We look forward to continuing to work with them to strengthen NATO, and that includes securing Sweden's quick accession to NATO, something that we know is now pending in the Turkish parliament. So there are obviously, this is not the first issue with which we've disagreed with the leadership of Turkey, but we still find them to be a productive and helpful NATO ally, and we'll continue to work with them on the things we agree on, the things on which we agree. and make clear to them when we have disagreements.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. There are some efforts in the Iraqi parliament. They're trying to set up a session behind the closed doors to discuss a decision to expel the U.S. forces and also closing down the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. Do you have any concern on that and to that move? And adding to that, Hadi al-Amri, Badr organization leader, that they are part of the Iraqi government. Today he said that there is no justification and reasons for the U.S. forces to stay in Iraq and we should let them go out. What's your comment on that?
So I don't have any way to judge the veracity of the first report you said. I will say that our forces continue to operate in Iraq to prevent the reemergence of ISIS, which is an important counterterrorism priority, both for the United States and for other countries in the region. And I don't have any changes to announce in our posture, which, by the way, would come from the Pentagon anyway, not here.
Another question. According to senior DoD officials, from October 17 to date, there were 23 attacks on the U.S. forces in the region. And 14 of these attacks were happened in Iraq. And some of the attacks in Syria were conducted by the Iraqi militia. Why the U.S. is hesitate to targeting the Iraqi militia groups backed by Iran?
So I would say comments regarding DoD, comments made by DoD officials and comments about DoD operations should probably be presented should be presented to DoD, not to the State Department. However, I will say the President has made clear that we will take every action that is necessary to defend U.S. forces, U.S. interests anywhere in the world. And I'll leave it at that. Let me just, guys, because we're getting short on time. I got a number of people. Let me move on.
Thank you. The UAE requested a UN Security Council emergency meeting today to seek a binding resolution demanding humanitarian pause in Gaza. What is the U.S. position on this resolution, and is there any update on the U.S. position on either a humanitarian pause or a ceasefire in Gaza?
So I'm not going to comment on the resolution other than that our ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, continues to work to try to reach consensus, something that we hoped we'd be able to do last week when our resolution that had majority support inside the UN Security Council was vetoed by Russia and China. But as the Secretary made clear last week, we think that humanitarian pauses are something that should be considered if they would allow hostages to be released in transit out of Gaza. We think they could be considered for the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and we'll continue to make that clear. Go ahead. I promise I'd come to you next.
Thank you, Matt. We have seen your statement over the weekend about attacks on opposition, grand rally, and violence in Bangladesh. This violence basically orchestrated from the ground report. This violence orchestrated by the police and internet shutdown prior to the rally began. And since then, police have arrested hundreds of opposition politicians, including the Secretary General of the main opposition, BNP, and the family members of the opposition leaders, and filed 100 cases against them. So how does the U.S. react on this situation? And one more follow-up.
We condemn the political violence that took place in Dhaka on October 28th, the reported killing of a police officer, a political activist, and the burning of a hospital and buses are unacceptable, as is violence against civilians, including journalists. We encourage the authorities to thoroughly investigate the incidents at the October 28th rally and to hold those responsible for violence accountable. The holding of free and fair elections is the responsibility of everyone. Voters, political parties, the government. Guys, everyone relax. I'm not even done with this answer. He has a follow-up before we start yelling. The voters, political parties, the government, the security forces, civil society, and the media.
In recent days, pro-government media outlets and their supporters have criticized the U.S. Embassy Dhaka officials for meeting with the opposition political leaders and dissidents. These reports suggested that the regime is spying on the U.S. diplomats. Are you allowing the spying U.S. diplomats in the country, Bangladesh?
I will just say that diplomats talk to a wide variety of people, civil society organizations, media professionals, business leaders, cultural contributors, educators, and many other types of organizations and individuals. That is what diplomats do as part of their everyday jobs, and guys, relax, and we'll continue to do so. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matthew. What exactly will be in the supplemental aid package for Israel and Ukraine?
So
well, specifically Israel, actually.
So the White House admitted that. You can go look at it. It's on the available online at the Office of Management and Budget, and you can look to see all of the various programs.
And should Congress pass Ukraine and Israel assistance together or separately?
We think they need to pass both of those priorities, and they need to do it as soon as possible.
And will the U.S. allow Gazan refugees to enter the United States? Are there plans to admit Gazan refugees into the U.S.?
Again, we believe that the people of Gaza want to stay in Gaza. That's what we've consistently heard from Palestinian leadership and others in the region, and we one last question. That's three.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Mr. Miller,
Go
ahead.
I have two questions on Russia. So the Russian foreign ministry said last week that they received a set of proposals on the strategic stability dialogue and arms control from the United States. Do you have anything on this? Do you have any details?
I don't, but I'd be happy to take it back and follow up.
And follow up on Bangladesh.
All right, you got to stop yelling when other people are answering questions. I'm sure your colleagues would appreciate you not, as I would say to my kids, walking on their words. Go ahead.
And I wanted to come back to my questions on CTBT. You remember I asked you about.
I did. Let me follow up with you after I believe we may have a statement coming out on that today.
Okay, thank you.
Now. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Miller, my name is Jacob Milton. I'm working for Bangladeshi weekly newspaper, and We Are the People. I have a question. Last October 28th, under the direction of Hasina Sheikh, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, the armed cadre of Awami League, wearing police uniform and using petrol bomb and gunpowder, killing innocent civilians, destroying the property of the government as well as publics, and that ruling party is describing that those attacks took place by the opposition party, and they are doing it for the last 14 years. I think internationally, everyone recognized that all of the attacks called terror attack or anything, as you are mentioning some terror group all over the world, it is one of the ruling parties, armed cadre, Satro League and Jubo League, and some other people. Does America have any plan to designate them as a terrorist organization?
So I think that everything I said in response to the previous question on Bangladesh applies here. And I will say that we have made clear that we will take actions if necessary to support democracy in Bangladesh. And I would never preview those from the podium. Go ahead. Two more and then we'll finish up. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Matt. Pakistan's envoys at the UN.
I don't know.
Pakistan's envoys at the UN, Mr. Munir Akram, said that this whole Israel-Palestine issue did not start since October 7th. It has been there since last 50 years. Many allies of the US are asking for ceasefire, and at the United Nations, 120 countries asked for the ceasefire. Don't you think ceasefire is a good way to at least move forward at the current situation?
We do not, because we believe that Israel has the right, the obligation, the responsibility to defend itself against those brutal terrorist attacks. The United States of America, every country in the world, if it was attacked and a terrorist organization was sitting across its border ready to launch new attacks, would want to carry out operations to conduct those. That continues to be our position. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nazira Karimi, Afghan journalist. Although Taliban receive a lot of money under humanitarian program from United States, Europe, anywhere, and also Pakistan forcibly push Afghan people. They are crying, children. Today, so many of them has been killed during the way. I don't know. That's not fair. There is any possibility to United States bring a lot of pressure, give them more chance to wait, and Taliban should prepare for them to go voluntarily to Afghanistan. They contact with me so many people, sir, to change their mind. Pakistani authorities should wait a little bit, give them more chance.
Let me just take that question back. And with that, today I'll wrap. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.